Well, let's just jump right in. I'd like for us to consider one verse in the New Testament about parenting. And really, there's not a lot about parenting in the New Testament, lots of principles, but not a lot of specific commands. But there's one verse, and it's found in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. If you're with us week 1, we kind of looked at this a little bit as we looked at God's ideal for the family. And this is a one power-packed verse for parents. And here's what that verse says. It says, "Do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Or we can consider that in the New American Standard Bible. Do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So what is parenting? Well, it's 2 commands we're given here. One is in the positive, one is in the negative. On the negative side, we've got do not exasperate your children. Do not provoke them to anger. And on the positive side of things, we have this command, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. So really, again, to boil it down, what is parenting? Parenting is to love our children in such a way that they grow up where they're not embittered or angry or exasperated with you, with your family, with God, with the church, and to raise them in the training and the instruction of the Lord. I mean, how wonderful that the whole of parenting can be summarized by one verse and just 2 commands. And while these 2 things may seem easy or sound easy, oh, wow, great, just 2 things. We all know it's not that easy. Because truth be told, parenting is hard, isn't it? Parenting is really hard. I was talking with and communicating with a Newday dad this week, and he was just telling me in passing that morning in their house, his wife had made this shirt for the little daughter to wear to school that day because there's something special going on at school and she needed to wear this shirt. And the little girl was just throwing a fit. She did not want to wear this shirt. And they're like, what are we going to do? She's got to wear it to school. And the wife turns to the father and she says, will this get any better? And he said to her very wisely, he says, I don't think better, just different. And I said, that's really the reality of it. It doesn't get a whole lot better. Well, maybe it gets better, but it does stay hard and it does get different because parenting is hard. And it's hard for 3 primary reasons. We've got 3 things working against us when it comes to doing our job of raising up kids who are not embittered and are trained in the guidance of God. The first thing that's working against us is the world. There are dynamics at play in our world, in our culture, that make parenting difficult. Lots of them. And, if I had you stand up and tell me something in our culture that makes it difficult to parent, we could all probably name something. Let me just name one. Electronic media. This is something past generations did not have to deal with. Parents used to be able to determine what their children learned and when they learned it. We can kind of shelter our kids and expose them to things that adults know kind of when we determined it was best. But then came the invention of the media, the radio, the television, the internet, smartphones. Now our kids have the entire world in their pockets on a smartphone. It can be exposed to everything. And so now our kids can be home, but they're not home because the screen is taking them somewhere else and teaching them something else that we have no idea what's going on. I recently heard from a Barna research group that our children on average are getting 7 hours of screen time per day. 7 hours in front of a screen. That's in front of a television, a tablet, a computer, a smartphone, you name it. And that has an effect on our kids and on our kids' minds. So now, pop culture has become kind of the spiritual and the moral guide and compass for today's younger generation. Kids don't, for the most part, come to an adult that they trust for what's right or what's wrong, but rather they go to pop culture. Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez and YouTube and Google and Hollywood are all kind of telling our kids what's right, what's wrong, and what it means to be a young adult in America. That's just one part of our culture that makes it very difficult to parent. Another thing that makes parenting very difficult, not only the world, but it's your child. How can I put this politely? I don't know if I can, but children are born as little sinners. And the truth is that we don't need things to go bad for kids to get messed up. They come into the world messed up. Kids don't come into the world seeking God. We enter the world incredibly selfish. We want what we want when we want it. Thank you for the illustration. We want what we want when we want it. Maybe you've heard the toddler's creed, but if you've had toddlers, you know it's true. If it's mine, it's mine. If it's yours, it's mine. If I like it, it's mine. If I could take it from you, it's mine. If we're playing together building something, all the pieces are mine. If I had it and then I put it down, it's still mine. If you had it and put it down, it's mine. If we had it together and it was mine and then it's time to put it away, it's yours. Our children are born little selfish sinners. All that is required for kids to end up messed up is for a parent to do nothing. This is a biblical principle. All you got to do to mess up your kids is do nothing. And the third force that makes parenting so very, very challenging is you. Me. The only person more selfish in the world than that little toddler God just gave me is me. I want what I want when I want it. And if somebody gets in the way of me getting what I want when I want it, I can get pretty cantankerous. And who is the one who's always getting in the way of me getting what I want when I want it? But these little kids, always screaming for my attention. And so you take the forces of society working against us, and you add to that the sinful nature of your child, and then the fact that we're just grown-up, selfish sinners given this job of parenting, and it is any wonder how any of our kids end up not angry and loving God. But that is why it's clearly a miracle of grace. Which is why if there is one thing I would say a parent needs to do well to raise a child, according to Ephesians 6:4 in this world, it is to pray well. If there's anything you leave here with today, I hope it would be a sense of helplessness if you were a parent right now. A sense of helplessness. How in the world can I do this? With the world, with my child, with my nature, all that. How in the world can I do it? I hope you would feel helpless, because when we get helpless, that's when we get on our knees and we begin to cry out to God to help us to raise this child, and we ask for divine intervention. There's so much working against us. And this is evident in the fact that we're seeing in 18 and 30-year-olds right now, I think it's David Kinnaman recently he's the president of the Barna Group. He recently did a huge survey, and he published a book based on this survey and this research called You Lost Me. And it's about this generation of mosaics from 18 to 30 years old. And what he found is that 59% of young people who were active in their churches are choosing to leave the church between the ages of 18 and 30. 59%. That's 59% of our kids sitting in this room right now. 6 out of 10, between the ages of 18 and 30, if they're anything like the rest of this nation, will make a choice in that age group to say, you know what, I'm done with the church. Are you okay with that? That is unacceptable to me. That just makes me want to weep. And so, because we can't like those odds, we as parents need to plead for God's grace, and we need to plead for God's power to help us raise godly children, because if we're not praying parents, I believe we will be failing parents. And so we're given these two commands in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. Do not exasperate your children. Bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Number one, keep your children from anger and frustration. Don't exasperate them. And at the same time, bring them up in the instruction and training of Jesus. And so I want to break these two parenting commandments down. And as I do so, I'd like to kind of share from our experience in the Kennedy household. And I also want to share from the experience of others who are sitting around you, other parents. I did a survey this week of lots of parents, some who are in the midst of it, but more who kind of have already launched children according to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, and kind of ask what they were doing. And so a lot of what I'll be sharing is coming out of that as well. And just, right up front, one caveat, I am not a perfect dad. We don't have a perfect family. I think you guys are all already in tune with that. You know us well enough to know that we don't. We have two boys, 19 and 15. We've had lots of issues. We've made lots of mistakes. I think they're both pretty good kids. I love them. I think they're great to be around. I'm proud of them. But I've made so many mistakes as a father. I've learned a lot from those mistakes. I'm still learning. But I'll tell you what, I feel like I'm just starting to hit my groove as a dad. 19 years in, and I'm almost done. It's kind of sad. But hey, I'm still learning. And maybe I can help you. Who knows? All right, so let's consider this first negative command. The first one is do not exasperate your children. What does this mean? In parallel passages like Colossians chapter 3, verse 21, Paul writes, do not embitter your children in a way that will embitter them, or excuse me, in a way that they will become discouraged. And so Paul uses the word discouraged there. And the point is, don't raise your children in a way that will embitter them, that will make them resentful and angry or discourage them. Now, this doesn't mean that we never do things that our kids don't like. It doesn't mean that we never do things that don't make our kids angry. And we take that away, or we discipline them in this way, or we don't do this when they want to do it. I can't do that because it'll make them angry. No. We will make our kids angry, and that means you're doing your job. Parents must do things and make decisions that will make their kids angry and exasperated. What the Bible is talking about is this trend in a child's life where bitterness and anger kind of takes up residence in their heart long term and sets down roots and begins to take over their character and their outlook on life. Don't be so hard on them that they become embittered. Or as one parent at Newday put it this week, don't be a jerk to your children. I was putting it pretty plainly. Okay. Don't raise them in a way that they become angry and alienated from you, from your family, from the church, or from God. None of us want that for our children. So the question is, what do we do, or what don't we do? And the answer, I think, to that question is somewhat counterintuitive for some of us, because as we think about raising kids who aren't embittered or aren't angry, we may think, well, then I need to be their friend, and I need to make their life easy, and I can't discipline them too much. But the actual research and the Bible and experience all say it's actually the opposite. That if you want to raise children who aren't angry, then you need to be the parent. And they need boundaries, and they need correction, and they need guidance, and they want discipline. And so if you try to play the part of your child's friend, and you try to give them everything they want, and you let them do what they want when they want to do it, you will raise angry, exasperated children. But on the other hand, if you are too firm and too restrictive or correcting, you will raise angry, embittered children. So I think the first principle to raising children who aren't exasperated is to raise children from firmness to freedom. And what I mean by that is that there are stages of parenting. I don't know if you've ever thought about parenting like this, but there are stages of parenting, and at different stages, our strategy as parents are different for each stage. So we discipline early, and we give more and more freedom away until eventually they're leaving the house feeling well-equipped to move into the world. And so if we were to break this down, it might look something like this. And of course, these aren't hard and fast ages, but like from the ages of 1 to 5, those are the discipline years. Those are the times when you say, these are the boundaries, I'm the boss, I'm going to be in charge for the next 20 years or so, let's get used to it. Ages 5 to 12 are the training years. So if the discipline years are kind of saying this is what's wrong, the training years is where you start really training them on what's right and how to live and how to get along with other people. And then ages 18 to 20 are kind of the coaching years, where you're kind of interacting with them and, hey, let's talk about how that went, what can we learn from that, and how can we do better next time. And then, of course, the ages of 18 on, we kind of lose a lot of our influence anyway, and the friendship stage begins. And so regarding the first stage, one Newday parent writes, be the parent. The day will come when you will be their friend, but when they are young, they need parental guidance. So during this first stage of parenting, the discipline years, we as parents, we set the rules, we set the boundaries, we teach our children that there are consequences to disobedience and rebellion. And really during these years, two of the most important things are consistency and follow-through. Consistency and follow-through. We're training our children, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is who's in charge, this is what happens when I disobey. And so consistency and follow-through are so important. But that's so hard during this stage. Those of you who are in this stage, you know what I'm talking about, because during this stage, you are exhausted. Right? I mean, when your kids are 1 to 5 years old, you're just tired all the time, and you feel like all I do is discipline. All I'm doing is discipline. Another timeout, another this, another spanking, whatever it is, taking this away, And so sometimes you could just have the temptation to say, you know what, I just can't discipline anymore. I just can't do it. And the danger then is to say, you know what, I want to maybe put off the disciplining until a later stage when they're older, and maybe I could reason with them. And I've seen parents do this, put off the discipline past stage 1, maybe to the end of stage 2, when they're 12 and 13, start saying, okay, now I'm going to start disciplining, but guess what? It is too late. And now you've got a teenager who you can't just pick up and put in time out. But you got a kid who could walk out of the house and you don't know where he went, or get in a car and drive away, and it's too late to discipline. And so we have to put in the time. And we have to understand that stage 1 is just a stage. And if you will put in the time, you will reap dividends later. If there's one thing I am most thankful for in our parenting experience, is that we stayed consistent during that time. And we continue, of course there was grace, of course there was flexibility, and there were times when we had to choose our battles to fight, and there was love. It doesn't mean that we were just complete military, but we were consistent, and we didn't let rebellion go. And that's one of the important things I think Kim and I learned during that stage, was to keep from embittering our children. We learned to discipline the attitude and not the action. You've probably heard that before, and I know a lot of you are doing that. But there will be times when our kids will do things that, they just did it out of ignorance. Like, we never explained to them that was wrong, and you could tell they didn't know what they were doing was wrong, or it was an accident, not because they were careless, but they were reaching for the butter and they knocked over their milk or whatever. You don't discipline for accidents. You don't discipline when they're doing something wrong out of ignorance, but you use it as a teaching opportunity. But rather, we discipline the attitude of rebellion, of willful disobedience. And if you're a parent and you have small kids, you've probably been there before, but when you're looking at your 3-4-year-old son in the eye and you're saying, don't do that, and he's looking at you, and then he just does exactly what you tell him not to do, and then he watches you just to see, what are you going to do? I am learning here. Are you going to be the dad, or am I going to be the boss? Who's in charge? And that's when we had to act and say, okay, I'm in charge. Let's use this as a learning opportunity. Discipline the action, or the attitude, not the action. Here's some things. So I asked some other Newday parents some things that they learned during that stage. One parent talked about, choosing your battles, knowing where, this has no long-term consequence. I'm going to let them win that one, what you're going to wear, what your hair is going to look like, whatever it is. But I'm not going to lose this particular battle. Choose your battles. Another parent talked about, don't give a punishment or offer a reward without really thinking through whether you're willing to do it. A lot of times we've done that before, as parents. We make if you do that, we're not going out tonight. No family night. We're not going out to the restaurant. If you do that, and then they do it, and you're like, oh. Now the whole family is punished, and, well, okay, we'll go. And then the kid's like, yes, I get to disobey, it's okay. And so make sure you think through really what that punishment is and whether you're willing to follow through before you speak. I'm not going to take time to go into all the other stages. The point really is that there are different stages, and that we have to understand that we're in stages. And the first stage is for establishing kind of who's in charge. That lays the foundation. And the object is to slowly give away freedom as the kids get older and older. Never forget a book I read during the end of the training years. It's called The Preteen Wise, one of the best parenting books I've ever read. Talk about how to start giving away some of that freedom 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, so that by the time you get to the teenage years, you're not going to have a lot of the same issues that you might had you been more controlling during those earlier years. Highly recommend that book. Which leads to a second point on not raising embittered children would be a learner. We need to always be learners as parents. And we learn from outside sources like books. And Kim and I, when we were younger, we read everything we can get our hands on in parenting to make sure that we were learning constantly. And all kinds of resources out there, as you know. But we also chose to learn from others. We always spent time with people who were a little farther along on the parenting journey than we were, and we learned from their successes and from their failures. We learned from watching them. We learned from talking to them and interacting with them. I'll never forget learning from one particular friend early when our boys were young. And these folks had 2 boys like us, but they were 10, 13 years older than our boys, and they were launching. And these were 2 boys who you would describe as being embittered and angry. And they were in trouble with the law, and they were in trouble, doing drugs and alcohol. And you look at these two parents, you're like, how in the world can that be? These are such loving, attentive, engaged parents. How did this happen? And certainly there's not always cause and effect in parenting with our kids. I hope we know that. But so I asked, I said, what have you learned? And what could you share with me, someone who has two small young boys? And she looked back at her history and she said, I started to see bitterness take place, root in their heart when we started moving at important times when they were teenagers and separating them from their friends that made them very angry. And if I could do it all again, I wouldn't move. I would set down roots and stay. That stuck with me, and that's why we've been in the same place for 13 years during the formative years of that's not the only reason, but during the formative years of our kids' development, we said, you know what, we're not going to be uprooting them, but we're going to give them some roots and some friends. Always be a learner. Learn from other parents. And I'll say not just friends, but there's a wealth of knowledge in this room. I learned that this week again, but I've watched so many of you parent. There's a wealth of knowledge in parenting in this room. And so take advantage of that. Ask questions of each other and learn from one another. Tap into that. But more than just learn from one another, learn from your child. Every child is different, and what works for one child isn't necessarily going to work for another. And this was the case in our house. Our firstborn, he was a bit more willful, and so when he was growing up, what worked for him with discipline was a good spanking. And it changed his attitude for a week. He was polite and in alignment and obedient for a week after, so we had to spank him basically every week. But our younger son, when he came along, we learned very early that if we just looked at him funny, it would bring him into alignment because he's a little bit more of a pleaser. And so if we were to spank him, it scarred his heart. And so we maybe 3 spankings in his life ever, and that was for I didn't even give him one of those. That was one of you in the room gave him one of those, but we help each other out. So learn from your child. Learn what it is that they need. They're individuals, and we have to learn from them by watching them and watching for signs of anger, watching for signs of embitterment long term as it takes root in their heart. We need to know how far we could push our children, really, before they start to break. And we need to come up alongside them and give them a hug and have a pep talk and talk about, hey, I know this is hard, and, what can we do to make this easier? Just learn from your kids. Again, I remember another failure I had as a father that I learned from. It was after one of my kids' games. They're both soccer players, and one of them had a game, and I love watching their games. And, dads, we love to coach. We want to see our kids be the very, very best at everything they do and athletics and everything. And he played really well during this game. And but I saw things that he could do better. That's what coaches do. And so he came up to me after the game, and he said, hey, Dad, what did you think? How did I do? And I told him the few things I saw that he did well. And then I told him the things that he could do to be better. And I just watched the body language just deflate. And I had to process that, but I realized that my boys are now at a stage where they don't want a coach. They want a cheerleader. And so I've kind of had to switch roles. I let the coaches do the coaching now, and I've taken up my pom-poms, and I am now the cheerleader. So be a learner. Learn from your outside sources, learn from others, but learn from your kids as well. Be a constant learner. Finally, to not embitter your children and exasperate your children, it's all about relationship. It's really hard for your children to become long-term angry and embittered when you are always in their space, when you are always in relationship, when you're always doing things together, being in relationship. And for us at the Kennedy household, that has meant dinner around the dining room table every night of their life. Since they were born, we have been around the dining room table for dinner, television off, phones away, no electronics. We are talking over dinner. That's what's worked for us. One of the things that's kept us in each other's space. Another thing is Thursday night family night. A lot of you have wondered, why did you ever make appointments with me on Thursday night? Now you know, sacred from the time they were born, Thursday night. It's come to the place where if anybody schedules anything on a Thursday night, it seems like sin in the Kennedy household. And we command them to repent and get that off of their calendar, because Thursday night we're spending together as a family. We're going to be in each other's space. We're going to be talking about what's happening. If there's been something said that is starting to cause a root of bitterness, we're going to get it out. We're going to talk it through and make sure that relationship is good. So spend time together. Make relationship priority, and we're going to raise children who aren't angry and aren't embittered. All right, what about the second part of the command? Bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Well, this means just what it sounds like, right? Teach your kids to love Jesus. Teach your kids to obey Jesus. Teach your kids what it means to follow Jesus. And if you're a Christian here today, this is an imperative. It is a command. It's not something that we get to kind of say, well, sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But if you are a follower of Christ, this is the Bible's command to us as parents. Now, if you are not here today and you're not a Christian, this is optional for you, and you could check out now. You don't have to listen to the second part of this counsel, but I would encourage you to consider it. Because raising our kids to love and follow God not only equips them beautifully to interact well in this world, but it also gives them a support system in the church, but also through the Holy Spirit living in them that equips them for the difficult times of life. And so raising your kids to love and follow Jesus, I think, is a very wise parenting strategy. I'd urge you to consider it. Bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. How do we do this? First, if you're going to want to raise your children to love and follow Jesus, then we need to get it set as parents that following God is our number one priority. That we can't dabble with Jesus or our experience with him. And for many of us, we are kind of questionable about our relationship with Jesus, maybe on again, off again, or maybe kind of on the fence. But God is calling us to love him with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our strength, all of us. We need to be all in. We need to be sure we're completely in, because that in turn will lead to our kids being all in. But when we're kind of half in, or we're in and we're out, what that does is sends an incredibly dangerous message to our kids. Think this through with me. What do tens of millions of people do every year to keep from getting the flu? They go and get a shot, right? They get the vaccine. And what do they get injected with? Just a little bit of flu, right? And getting injected with a little bit of flu makes us immune to all of the flu. And what happens when we kind of dabble with Christianity or spirituality or church or whatever, however you want to say it, when we dabble with that with our kids, what we're doing is we're giving them a little bit of the things of God, which in turn will give them an immunity to all of the things of God. We are unknowingly vaccinating our children against Christianity when we're just kind of half in and dabbling, because they're going to think that they're all in, and they're missing all of the beauty and the grace and the power of the gospel of what it means to live a transformed life. We have been raising generations of kids who are inoculated against Christianity, and we see it in our culture today, a culture that has been inoculated against Christianity. So if you want to raise your child in the training and the knowledge of the Lord, you need to know whether you're all in or not. Jesus said it's better to be hot or cold. Don't be lukewarm. Are you all in? Are you ready to get serious about your relationship with Jesus? You need to put him first in your life. I hear things like, what? I just come to church for my kids. I want them to kind of get some of that teaching, some of that Bible teaching, learn some Bible stories so they can make their own decision when they're older. Or I know of parents who won't come to church with their kids, but they'll just send their kids maybe with someone else or drop them off. It doesn't work. You cannot outsource spiritual training. But you need to own it, and you need to model it, and you need to live it in your home and in your life. So this is the first thing we need to get straight. We can't do it without number one. Make God first in your life. Be a passionate follower of Christ. Number two thing that we need to do is lead your family in faith. We've got to be leaders. You know what? Edward, the Duke of Windsor, said this about America. He said, "The thing that impresses me most about America is the way the parents obey their children." Wow. Think about that. The way the parents obey their children. Question, are you leading your children, or are your children leading you? You are called to be the leader. You lead them spiritually. You set the tone in your home. And if you're going to be an effective leader, then we need to lead intentionally. We need to know where we're going. A leader knows where they're going and knows how to get there. And so we need to think this through. What is the objective I have for my kids? What is the outcome I want in them? That's something that a lot of parents don't think about. We think about how are we going to get through today. But think about when they're 20, when they're 30, what do you want them to look like? What qualities do you want to see in their lives? And then how am I intentionally leading to get so that I'm creating these outcomes in the lives of my kids? And again, parenting isn't all, cause and effect. Things happen, and great parents, sometimes their kids decide to do things that, we just don't understand. But a lot of it is cause and effect. And so we need to say, how am I going to get there? And so if we were to think through, well, if I'm looking at my actions right now, what would my actions say about what my goal is as a parent? How am I trying to lead? And a lot of us would say, well, you know what? I want to give my kids more than I had. Because we want to do good things for our kids. And so that then becomes our goal, to give them more than I had when I was a kid. Or we'll say, I want my kids to like me. I want to have a good relationship with them. And then that becomes the goal. And what helps us make decisions as parents is, whatever it takes to get them to like me. Or we'll say, I want my kids to have fun memories of family time and to look back at time in our family and say, wow, my family was fun and my family was great. And then that becomes our driving goal. And before long, if we aren't careful, because we haven't really thought through the end game, what happens is that rather than having a God-focused home, we begin to have a child-focused home, because it's all about creating experiences and giving them more than what I had and wanting them to like me. All of a sudden, we are focused on the children, and the children are driving things rather than being a God-focused family and allowing God to drive us in our decisions on how to raise them. Now, we want to give our kids both, right? We want them to like us. We want to give them great experiences. And we want them to love God and fear God. We want to bring them up and to not be angry, right? And so I don't think it has to be an either-or thing, but we do have to have our priorities in the right order. That God comes first. That obedience to God comes first. Our faith comes first. And so let me ask you this. Have you figured this out yet? Have you intentionally thought this through? What do I want the outcome to be for my kids? What do they look like when they're 25? What do they look like when they're 30? And I hope you come to the place where you could say, you know what, Ephesians 6:4, that's the outcome that I want. A child who is not embittered or angry at the church, at me, at God, and someone who has been brought up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. And if that's the case, then I would ask you, is how you're making decisions in your family today going to get you there? If an outside observer came into your family and watched how you spend your time, spend your money, make your decisions, would they say, yeah, you're on your way to having Ephesians 6:4 kids? Or would they say, it seems to me that you have a different outcome in mind by the way you're making decisions? I'll tell you what I've seen happen in so many families over my 17 years in ministry. And please know, I am not singling any family out here, and I know several of you are going to think I am. But this is a cultural trend that just needs to be kind of brought to light, is that we start with these great intentions when we have our kids, and we're like, you know what, I'm going to give them both. We're going to have great experiences in family time and lots of good times together, and also I'm going to bring them up to love God, but I'm going to have my priorities straight. I'm going to keep the main thing. And we do well usually, for the first couple of years, but then the activities start. For some kids it's 6, for some kids it's 8, for some kids it's 10, and the activities are list as long as my arm, whether it's figure skating or gymnastics or hockey or soccer, swimming, football, you name it, we have all the activities in our culture. That's great. But the family starts to try and balance both all of those activities and their faith life. But then the activities start to intensify. Maybe Johnny shows a propensity to play football really well or soccer really well. And the activities continue to intensify. And slowly, ever so slowly, God starts to get crowded out. And maybe it's starting by missing 1 week or 2 weeks at church just for a short season. We have a few playoff games and maybe a special tournament we need to go to. But before we know it, we say yes to more and more activities. And we haven't been to church in months, and we haven't talked about God or prayed at home together as a family in months. I'll never forget getting a letter from a Newday mom years back who experienced this very thing. And she explained how she never intended to fall away from church and eventually to fall away from God. It just started out as a few games. And before they knew it, their son was in several leagues because He was really good at what he did. And there was no time for church or faith. And she said if I could do it all over again, I would do it so very differently. And again, I'm not calling anybody out here. This is a cultural trend, which means it's a cultural trend. It just needs to be brought to light. We need to think these things through. Am I putting God first? What do we want to accomplish? What do we want to see our children become? And are the decisions I'm making in our life of faith in our home, is it going to get me there? Or am I inoculating my children? And as I talk about church attendance and use that as an example, you may be thinking, I'm kind of uncomfortable with kind of equating church attendance with my spiritual life. And I understand that. Certainly we could have a relationship with God. It's not about going to church. But if we're honest with ourselves, if we kind of fast forward and have a conversation with our kids when they're 25, 30, 35, that's not acceptable to us. I mean, just imagine you're having that conversation with your kids. They're 25, 30, 35 years old. Hey, have you been going to church? Come on, Mom. Come on, Dad. You know I don't need to go to church to have a relationship with God. Are you comfortable with that? I know for most of you, you're not. Because we want to see our kids integrated in a faith community, in a church. And if that's the case, then I have to be involved in church. I need to be fully engaged, fully plugged in. I need to model that. So again, it comes to this question of what do I want my kids to look like when they're adults, and what am I doing now to intentionally lead them there? It's not just about church attendance. It's about life in our home as well, of course. And so what will that look like? What will faith life look like in your home? Because there's no one-size-fits-all for how you're going to bring your kids up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. This is going to look different for every family. And for us, it's changed over the years, probably as it will for your family. What works for your kids when they're small isn't going to work for them necessarily when they're teenagers. When our kids were small, it was family worship every day. We were pretty faithful with that when they were kids. And as we grew older, that changed. Sabbath worship and discussions around the kitchen table about issues of faith and issues as they came up. Growing up, Sabbath was always a special time. Church attendance was never an option. We made sure that the Sabbath was a special day. We started every Friday night with a Sabbath treat, so the kids got a candy bar or a pack of gum or a little toy just to kind of bring in the Sabbath, let them know a special day had begun. It's just something to make the day special. And discussions at the dinner table, again, were very important. But again, how are you going to live out your faith in your home? How are you going to bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord? It'll look different for everybody. Just listen to what this one family said, who is very clearly trying to raise their children intentionally. This is a Newday family. It is our greatest wish to have our children know the Lord and have Him be the most important thing in their lives. Okay? That's the outcome they're shooting for. Of course, that doesn't happen on its own. Amen. We pray for our children daily, sometimes multiple times. Family worship is an important time in our day, as well as praying with our kids. We hope we have instilled the desire to lead a life of service by words and by example. We've made church attendance a priority. Adventist education, although expensive, has never been optional for us. We would never forgive ourselves if we didn't give our children every opportunity to stay linked to the church and other young people who believe as we do. So again, this is one family's experience. It's not one size fits all. But how will you integrate faith into your family's life? How will you lead your family intentionally? What's the outcome? How will I get there? Finally, if you want to bring up your children in the training and instruction of the Lord, we need to lean on others. This job is so hard, you can't do it on your own. I can't do it on my own. This is something that we rarely grasp, but when we do, it is liberating. I can't do it on my own. I wasn't created to do it on my own. I'm not supposed to do it on my own. I don't have everything my boys need to be brought up in the training instruction of the Lord. I don't have it. It's not in me. My wife doesn't have it. We need more than what we have to give them. I need what you have to invest in my children if they're going to become everything God wants them to do. And I can't tell you how many times in my boys' lives, and it's still happening to this very day, where I have fallen short on discipling them. And you may think in a pastor's house, all we do is talk about Jesus. No. No, we have a normal family, get distracted just like your family. Yeah, we try to make Jesus central, but there are times I fall miserably short at taking advantage of opportunities to speak into their lives spiritually. And it's at those times when God has led some man from this church into my son's lives to take them out to lunch, to pull them aside at church, to stop by their school and have a spiritual conversation with them. It's happened countless times. Or a Christian teacher or a principal will pull one of them aside and have a conversation. I can't tell you how grateful I am that God has given us the church, and he's given us Christian schools, and he's given us Christian friends, that we can lean on one another and get involved with one another's kids and make a difference. You know, I told you earlier about David Kinnaman's groundbreaking work on the Mosaic generation and this book, You Lost Me, and the 59% of active church kids who are choosing to not be involved in the church, 59%. And the number one thing, and you may want to know, how do we keep our kids from becoming one of those statistics? And he found one thing that's most important, more important than anything. And would you not want to know what that one important thing is? That would keep our kids from becoming statistics. It's this one thing. Whether or not they have a friend, an adult friend in the church, other than their pastor, their youth leader, or their parent, who they can go to and talk with. If a teenager can say, I have a friend who's an adult in my church who I could talk to, who isn't my pastor, is not my youth leader, is not my parent, they blow that statistic away and stay integrated in the church. And so I'll tell you, Newday has been beating the 59% average. We've been launching kids who, for the most part, are staying connected to the church. And I'll tell you why. It's because you guys have been doing this. So many of you have been taking an active role in the lives of the teenagers as they're coming up in this church. Maybe it's on a worship team, and you're interacting with the kids, asking them how their week went, or it's in a youth group, or it's at a service project that you're getting involved. Maybe you're just calling someone saying, hey, let's go to Starbucks, let's get a Frappuccino. I heard they're half off right now, and let's spend some time together. But it's because you did that, so many of our kids are staying connected to the church. And so that's another reason I could tell you with confidence, engage at Newday. There are no guarantees, but our kids, for the most part, are launching well, and we're happy about that. And we want to get better at this. We want to get better. Our goal is that we could ask any teenager at Newday, do you have an adult friend at this church who you could talk to? And the answer would be yes. That's our goal. And right now we're putting strategies together to figure out how can we do that systematically. But in the meantime, there doesn't need to be a system. There doesn't need to be a program. All it takes is for you to take time and introduce yourself to a young person if you don't know one already and say, what's life like? How's it going? How could I pray for you? How can I invest in you? And maybe after a relationship has developed, can I buy you breakfast? You may have more of an opportunity, whether you are old and you have great-grandkids now, or you're just starting off in life, maybe you're still single, maybe you don't have kids yet, maybe you do have kids. You may have more of an opportunity to speak into my children than I would have at this stage in their lives, spiritually. The same is true for you. I may have more of an opportunity to speak into your kids' lives than you would have right now. We need each other. Don't try to do it alone. Lean on others. One parent wrote me this week, said, when my kids were young, I actually heard this concept. One of the things I did was facilitate intentional adult relationships for them. It ended up that each of my kids had at least one other adult besides us they were close enough with to talk to. And that makes all the difference in the world. Do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. 2 commands that take a lifetime. So what does this mean for you today? What is God speaking to you today? Is it to begin to take your relationship with him seriously? Or is it to, if you begin to think of the outcomes in your kids and make decisions toward that? Is it to keep disciplining because you're in that disciplining phase? Or maybe it's, I need to get involved in the life of a young person and be a friend. But I'm asking you, what are you going to do with this? Regardless of whether you have children now or not.